The greatest architecture of any civilization is invisible. It is not stone or steel, but a faith, a shared belief that pieces of paper, digits on a screen, and promises written in ledgers actually hold value. That faith is trust. And when trust frays, empires do not fall like castles under siege. They unravel quietly, in ledgers and whispers, in boardrooms and back rooms, in the slow recalculation of what counts as wealth. Tonight, we will trace that invisible architecture. We will follow trust from clay tablets to digital ledgers, from temple priests scribbling debts to anonymous servers balancing global credit. We will show how the history of money is, in truth, the history of belief, and why the next great collapse will be less about bombs and more about a crisis of faith. Imagine a world where every promise matters. In ancient Mesopotamia, the first written records were not poems, they were accounts. Who owed grain, who owed labor, who promised harvests to a lord. Those early societies recognized something fundamental. Debt is more than arithmetic, it is social glue. The priests and kings who oversaw the ledgers also oversaw forgiveness. Every few decades, leaders would wipe the slate clean, jubilees that erased obligations to prevent the fabric of society from tearing. They understood, better than many modern states, that obligations, like weight on a bridge, must periodically be relieved, otherwise the bridge collapses. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and you see the next transformation. Debt moves from grain to gold, from local to international. And with it comes a new class of power, the financiers. Families like the Medici did not just lend money, they lent legitimacy. A king who could borrow reliably commanded armies. A merchant who could secure a loan could open markets across oceans. The credit lines, the bills of exchange, the early letters of credit, they were trust made portable. The art that adorned the palaces of Florence is no accident. Wealth flowed through credit, and credit required confidence in reputations, in contracts, in the public stories that supported them. History offers a brutal lesson. When trust is weaponized, the fallout is social and political. Spain in the 16th century, stuffed with New World silver, defaulted multiple times. Governments that borrowed beyond their capacity found that gold could not buy social legitimacy. In the 20th century, the lesson came into sharper relief. After the First World War, nations returned from trenches with mountains of IOUs and empty treasuries. The old anchor of trust, gold, could not withstand the pressure. Currencies were detached, printing presses roared, and what followed was not merely inflation, but political ruin. The story of 1920s Germany is instructive, not only because of the astronomical numbers, but because of what those numbers did to belief. When a currency that once bought bread becomes worthless, trust evaporates. Institutions that depend on faith, banks, markets, governments, do not collapse with drama. They cease to be believed in. And this is where trust becomes fragile. It is not the numerical size of debt alone that kills an empire. It is the mismatch between the promise and the belief backing it. When citizens, investors, or foreign holders begin to suspect the story is false, when confidence cracks, the system behaves like an organism in shock. Markets rear up, yields spike, credit lines freeze, and what was liquid becomes illiquid. Banks are not just institutions of capital. They are factories of faith. They rely on depositors believing in them. Corporations rely on creditors believing in future cash flows. Governments rely on domestic and international investors believing in their ability to serve debt. Walk through any historical unraveling, sovereign defaults, bank runs, currency collapses, and you find a breakdown in the public narrative. We witnessed the mechanics in 2008. It was tempting to cast the crisis as a technical failure, bad models, poor risk management, exotic derivatives. And those were failures. But beneath the jargon lay the deeper issue. The market's shared belief in endless home price appreciation and in the collateralized safety of complex securities. When the narrative died, so did liquidity. Overnight, instruments once considered safe revealed themselves as wagers on future trust. Governments responded with bailouts, backstops, and assurances. They injected capital, guaranteed deposits, and verbally rescued the story. Those measures worked, not because the underlying assets were magically restored, but because the public once again accepted the narrative that the system would hold. But history warns us there is a cost to repeatedly patching belief. Each rescue increases the social distance between those who benefit and those who do not. When bailouts protect banks while ordinary citizens face foreclosures and austerity, faith fractures along class and national lines. Trust is not monolithic, it is distributed. If parts of the population feel systematically sacrificed to protect financial continuity, their belief in institutions declines. That decline is not immediately visible in macroeconomic ratios. It appears first in social indicators: reduced voter turnout, political polarization, the rise of movements that promise to take back control. When political trust erodes, the financial narrative loses a pillar.
So what does a trust-based collapse look like in practice? Picture a prolonged period of elevated interest rates. The safe assumptions, cheap refinancing, manageable servicing costs, no longer hold. Governments that roll debt see their interest servicing consume discretionary budgets. Local councils cut services. Central governments defer investment. Households face mortgages reset higher. Corporations with stretched balance sheets delay hiring. Credit availability narrows. What began as purely financial pressure becomes a social contraction. Jobs lost, stores shuttered, and confidence in future stability erodes. The media amplifies fears. Narratives shift from temporary adjustment to systemic risk. In that moment, the story matters most. If the public believes in a coherent stabilization plan, the shock recedes. If not, trust retreats and the system reshapes under new assumptions. There are 3 historical exit routes from unpayable debt, and none are pleasant. First, inflation. Governments can shrink the real value of obligations by letting prices rise. It is the quiet method, the silent tax on savings and wages. Politically, it is often the least painful because it spreads hurt thinly and invisibly. Second, restructuring. Creditors accept losses. Renegotiations reduce principal or extend maturities. That requires coordination and the willingness of powerful creditors to bear pain. Third, default, an abrupt end to repayment. Default is messy and reputationally destructive. It can trigger contagion, as one default shatters the belief that other promises will be met. These paths are not purely mechanical choices. They are collective acts of rewriting the narrative. Which path will modern states choose? Likely all 3 at different times and places. Already we see the signs: low but rising inflation,
episodic debt restructuring in corners of the globe, and the specter of sovereign defaults. But crises are not uniform. Each economy has its own vulnerabilities: currency mismatch, weak fiscal capacity, political brittleness. For the world's dominant currencies, the choice is constrained by geopolitical responsibility. A sudden default by a major economy would shock the entire financial architecture. So the adjustments will be political theater as much as policy. Staged restructurings, carefully managed inflation, and occasional bailouts shrouded in technocratic language.
Which brings us back to you. If trust is the engine of modern finance, what can individuals and societies do when that engine sputters? First, lower the psychological dependence on fiat narratives. That does not mean retreating to primitive hoarding, but diversifying what you consider wealth. Real assets, land, businesses with durable cash flow, skills that adapt to change, are forms of value that do not vanish with a headline. Second, understand the mechanisms by which promises are created and enforced. Knowledge inoculates panic. When you understand that government bonds are promises backed by tax capacity and political will, you can judge risk less by noise and more by fundamentals. Third, insist on political transparency and resilience. Democracies with accountable institutions tend to retain trust longer because their policy responses have legitimacy. When institutions appear captured by private interests, legitimacy erodes quickly. Finally, accept that collapse is not a single spectacular event. It is a rearrangement of assumptions. Some empires die in fireworks. Most die in the slow erosion of expectations. The Roman Empire did not fall in a day, but in a centuries-long redefinition of what empire meant. The same is true of financial systems. The current regime, one built on limitless credit and centralized backstops, will change not only from market forces, but from shifting beliefs about fairness and sustainability. We are living in an epoch of manufactured promises, where the largest risk is social rather than purely fiscal. The more we borrow today under the assumption of tomorrow's growth, the more we load risk on future belief. That is the moral of every historical default and every jubilee that came before. If trust is the currency of civilization, then protecting it must be the core economic task, not only by balancing budgets, but by balancing the stories we tell one another about what counts as fair, just, and sustainable. When the ledger stops balancing, when the public stops believing, nothing in an economy remains untouched. The lights stay on and the trains run for a time, but the seams begin to separate. Empires collapse in silence when faith finally unravels in private rooms, in whispered meetings, and in the slow recalculation of promises. That is why history matters. It is the longest, most patient teacher on how fragile our invisible architectures really are. So when someone tells you debt is merely accounting, remember the ancients who wiped ledgers clean to save society. Remember the bankers of Florence and the blockades of 1914. Remember that the machines we built to manage promises are only as durable as the common belief that underpins them. Protect the story. Demand accountability. Build real value. And above all, keep asking the inconvenient question: when trust runs out, who will stand to lose the most? If that gave you a perspective you didn't have before, subscribe and join the investigation. History holds the lessons, and they are not written in numbers alone.